When we walk with the Lord in the light of His Word, what a glory He sheds on our way. While we do His good will, He abides with us still, and with all who will trust and obey. Trust and obey, for there's no other way to be happy in Jesus, but to trust and obey. Not a shadow can rise, not a cloud in the skies, but His smile quickly drives it away. Not a doubt nor a fear, not a sigh nor a tear can abide while we trust and obey. Trust and obey, for there's no other way to be happy in Jesus, but to trust and obey. Not a burden we bear, not a sorrow we share, but our toil He doth richly repay. Not a grief nor a loss, not a frown nor a cross, but is blessed if we trust and obey. Trust and obey, for there's no other way to be happy in Jesus, but to trust and obey. But we never can prove the delights of His love until all on the altar we lay. For the favor He shows and the joy He bestows are for those who will trust and obey. Trust and obey, for there's no other way to be happy in Jesus, but to trust and obey. Then in fellowship sweet we will sit at His feet, or we'll walk by His side in the way. What He says we will do, where He sends we will go. Never fear, only trust and obey. Trust and obey, for there's no other way to be happy in Jesus, but to trust and obey.
Do you remember what I suggested you read last week? The Psalms of Ascent. How many managed to read the Psalms of Ascent last week? Yes, I was afraid of that. I was very much afraid of that. Well, let me say something by way of introduction for those who have not been attending that class. We were stressing the fact that although we have one book of Psalms in the authorized version, in actual fact, the Hebrews divided their Psalms into 5 books. And I think that the revisions, that's the English Revised Version, the American Revised Versions, have reverted to the original Hebrew division of 5 books of Psalms. 150 altogether. And without going into too many details, you will remember that we did stress the fact that the Psalms were meant to be sung. And although we speak of the Psalms of David, in actual fact, probably the first 2 books of Psalms, the first 2 groups of Psalms, were the original Psalms of David, and the others are the Psalms of David in the sense of being the collection of Psalms of which David himself was the editor. We also stressed, having said that, the fact that there are in these Psalms some Psalms that certainly could not have been written by David and were not written until sometime after the death of David, because 1 or 2 of them actually refer to the return from the captivity in Babylon, which was an event that took place a long time after the death of David. However, the Psalms were meant to be sung. And I suggested last week that we look at one of these groups of psalms that were meant to be used in a special way. Actually, there are two groups of psalms that had special significance. We'll begin with the smaller group first. Then we'll go on to the Psalms of Ascent. Psalm 113 to 118 are called the Hallel Psalms. The Hallel Psalms, simply from the word Hillel, which is to praise. And in fact, the Hebrew word for the book of Psalms, or the collection of Psalms, is Tehillim, which means the praises. But these were special psalms of praise for a special purpose. If you look at them, Psalm 113 to 118, 6 altogether. Now, sometimes people have mistakenly called this group the Great Hallel, but that's not the case. The Great Hallel is Psalm 136. Look it up, just briefly. 136, and you'll see why this is called the Great Hallel. Oh, give thanks unto the Lord, for he is good, for his mercy endureth forever. Oh, give thanks unto the God of gods, for his mercy endureth forever. Oh, give thanks unto the Lord of lords, for his mercy endureth forever. And you see how this goes as a refrain all through the Psalms. All through the Psalm, this idea of giving thanks and the mercy of God enduring forever. And that is the great Hallel, the great Psalm of praise. But the others were called the Hallel because they were sung at a special time. They were sung particularly at the great feast of the Passover and Pentecost and Tabernacles. And if you look, the 6 Psalms are divided into 2 groups. Particularly at the Passover, Psalm 113 and 114 were sung before the second cup in the Passover celebration. And then after the second cup, there was the celebration of the Passover meal and the third cup. And then Psalms 115 and 1 to 118 were sung after the fourth cup. I think sometimes we forget that there were 4 cups used, 4 cups drunk during the Passover celebration of the Jews. I mention particularly these Psalms because you remember in Matthew 26 verse 30, it says, after they had sung a hymn, it says in the authorized version, they went out into the Mount of Olives. The Greek word is a participle. After hymning, not just singing one hymn, but after hymning, they went to the Mount of Olives. And without a doubt, what Jesus sang on the night in which he was betrayed, before going to the Mount of Olives, were Psalms 115 to 118, which concluded the Passover celebration. And if you look at the last of these Psalms, Psalm 118, you'll find there are words in it which are mentioned in Matthew, Mark, Luke, Acts, Ephesians, and 1 Peter, and words which must have had a very special significance to Jesus. Look at Psalm 118. He says, the stone which the builders rejected, the same is become the head of the corner. Verse 22. The stone which the builders rejected is become the head of the corner. And these words are taken in the New Testament, and as you very well know, they're applied to Jesus himself. Let's look at the first of these Psalms, Psalm 113. Each one which God is exalted. There's first of all a call to praise in the first 3 verses. God is high above all the nations, and his glory is in the heavens. But in verse 6, the psalmist says a very remarkable thing, and of course we're going to be dealing with all the Psalms in detail later on, I hope, once we've got through this review. In verse 6 he says a very remarkable thing. He humbleth himself to behold the heavens and the earth. Or as my version says here, he humbleth himself to behold the things that are in heaven and in the earth. You know, man turns to look at the sky the stars, and he does it with pride. Pride in the glory of God and the power of God. And also he humbles himself as he looks at the sky, because you remember the psalmist himself says, when I consider the heavens, the work of thy fingers, the moon and the stars which thou hast ordained, what is man that thou art mindful of him? But God humbles himself when he looks at the earth. The idea is that God is so far above creation in the majesty of his existence that it's an act of condescension on God's part even to look on the heavens and the earth. And of course, the psalmist says that this self-abasement of God continues, so that he stoops to raise the poor and lift the needy and turn barrenness into fertility. When I read this psalm, I remember Philippians chapter 2 and verse 10. And you think of the one who, being in the form of God, thought it not a thing to be grasped after to be equal with God, but humbled himself. Took upon himself the form of a man. Being found fashioned in the form of a man, became obedient even unto death, the death of the cross. But in verse 4, you've got the idea of the height and the depth. The Lord is high above the nations, his glory above the heavens. And yet in verse 7, he stoops to the lowest. He raises the poor out of the dust. In verse 3, you've got not just height and depth, but you've got the horizontal and the vertical. From the rising of the sun unto the going down of the same. It's all the praise of God. Let's pass on. The next psalm, Psalm 114, looks at the greatness of God in a different way. Psalm 113 emphasizes the tenderness and the mercy of God. But here the psalmist thinks about the might of God, and uses the name which is characteristic of might, Elohim, which is God. You remember that I pointed out the way that the names for God were used in the Psalms, the three primary names. We have, first of all, Elohim, which is the word that is translated God. We have the word Adonai, which is the word translated Lord. And we have, well, the nearest we get to it is Yahweh, or sometimes we say Jehovah. Yahweh, which is the name that speaks of the becoming one, the redemptive name of God. Well, here, the psalmist is using the name of God, which indicates the might and the power of God. If you glance through it briefly, you'll see that it's a song about the Exodus, when Israel went forth out of Egypt, it begins. And where was the might of God more evident than in the deliverance that God wrought for his people, bringing them out of Egypt and carrying them through the wilderness right on to the land of Canaan. And again, you've got the two extremes. You've got power over nature. He says the sea fled, the Jordan rolled back, the mountains were moved. Tremble thou earth at the presence of the Lord. But it's not the destructive might that the psalmist is singing about. He said it's the creative might, the life-giving might of God. The rock is turned into a pool, the flint into a fount of water. Psalm 115. He says, not unto us, O Lord, not unto us, but unto thy name give glory. And this time, 13 times in 18 verses, the name Yahweh or Jehovah is used. Not the name for might, but the redemptive name of God. The name that links God with his people in his people's needs. And there follows in the rest of these verses a very scornful description of the gods that men have made for themselves from silver and gold, with mouths that don't speak, and eyes that don't see, and with ears that don't hear, gods that are lifeless. And the psalmist lays down a principle which is absolutely true, that man always becomes like the God that he worships. And he urges men to put their trust in Jehovah. Because he says God's people are going to overcome death. We will bless Jehovah from this time forth and forevermore. Now, this thought of victory in death is expanded in the 116th Psalm. It almost seems, as I read that psalm, that the writer's been in very great danger. Danger that's threatened his life. But he's been delivered, and in it he calls upon God. And he has a lovely phrase in verse 15. Precious in the sight of the Lord is the death of his saints. O Lord, truly I am thy servant. I am thy servant, the son of thy handmaid. Thou hast loosed my bonds. And he finishes again with, praise ye the Lord. Hallelujah. Psalm 117 is interesting. It's the shortest psalm in the book if you look at it. It's just 2 verses. As a matter of fact, you might want to remember that Psalm 117 is the middle chapter of the Bible. The middle chapter. In my version, it has 32 words in it. In actual fact, in Hebrew, it has just half of these 16 words. And it's called the Dunbar Psalm because at the Battle of Dunbar in 1650, on the 3rd of September, the Puritans were led into battle chanting this psalm. Not much in it. Oh, praise the Lord, all ye nations, laud him, all ye peoples, for his mercy is great toward us, and the truth of the Lord endureth forever. Praise ye the Lord. Now you can imagine the host of the Puritan army going into battle chanting that psalm. It was enough to put the fear of death into anybody, I imagine. And they got the victory. Now, of course, in contrast with this shortest psalm, 119, the next but one is the longest, but we're going to have to spend a morning on that one. Psalm 118, the last of the Hallel. And it's a song of perfect victory. And it seems almost certain it was intended to be sung in some triumphal procession as the people made their way to the temple to worship. In fact, it actually celebrates the beginning, or the re-beginning, the recommencement of public worship after a lapse of years, because it's a post-captivity psalm. Part of it, according to history, was sung in the streets, and part on Mount Zion, that same mountain where 500 years later the Lord carried his cross. It opens with a challenge and an invitation to worship. To come to the house of the Lord. Oh, give thanks unto the Lord, for he is good, for his mercy endureth forever. Let Israel now say that his mercy endureth forever. Let the house of Aaron now say that his mercy endureth forever. Let them now that fear the Lord say that his mercy endureth forever. In actual fact, the first 8 verses were probably chanted by the priests, and then the 3 verses, that's 9, 10, and 11, the response from the congregation. And towards the end, the last 3 verses at least, again chanted by the people. It's what's called antiphonal. It means a response psalm. And this challenge for worship is also in triplicate, as you see. First, Israel. That's the nation. Then the house of Aaron. That's the priest. And then all they that fear the Lord. And incidentally, I might point out that this expression, all they that fear the Lord, is in the Hebrew a technical expression, and it refers to the proselytes, people who are not of Israel, but people who've been attracted to the religion of Israel and were in the way of becoming worshippers of Jehovah. So, first of all, Israel, God's own people, called to worship him. And the priests called to worship him. And all those who fear the Lord, all those who come under the influence of the God of Israel and who seek to worship him, are invited to do so as well. Then there follows this personal testimony in verses 5 to 21. And finally, we've not got the time to go into all of these details right now. At verse 22, again, as I say, the multitude takes up the song. And by this time, the procession reached Mount Zion. and they're going to sing the well-known words that I referred to. The stone which the builders rejected, the same is become the head of the corner. Now, we're going to touch on these psalms later on, as I say, but we want to pass on. The other group that I mentioned that is worthy of consideration is the group that begins at 120. Psalm 119 is a special study on its own. As you see, each section begins with a letter of the Hebrew alphabet, and we're going to have to take one morning to deal with this particular psalm. It contains 176 verses, so we won't even get to it then. But the Psalms of Ascent, that Brother Frisbee remembered, begin at Psalm 120, and they go to 134. Here's this other special group of psalms. They're called the Psalms of Ascent for a very good reason. In all probability, they were sung by the pilgrims as they made their way from their villages up to the city of Jerusalem for the great feast. I know the titles, the Song of Ascent, or the Songs of Going Up, or Song of Steps, has tended to be confusing. Somebody put forth the idea that there were 15 steps between the court of the women and the court of the men, and the priest used to pause in every step and sing one of these psalms, 15 steps, 15 psalms altogether. But that doesn't seem to be based on fact. There's no evidence for that. Somebody else suggested these were psalms that were sung by the exiles returning from captivity in Babylon, but there's not much evidence for that either. The most likely explanation is that these were the psalms that the people all sang as they made their way up to Jerusalem to celebrate the feasts. And you remember what it was like in those days. They didn't have the kind of transportation we have. They had to walk. And you know, too, that the law required that every male of 12 years and upward must appear before God in Jerusalem on the three major feasts, the feast I mentioned, Passover, Tabernacles, and Pentecost. And the pilgrims, old men and young men alike, would leave the little villages and make their way out of the village to the great highways that all converged on Jerusalem. And they went along singing. And other groups would come out of other villages and join them, and gradually by the time they reached Jerusalem, there'd be a tremendous crowd of people all singing the psalms. I think there's an example of that in when Jesus went up to Jerusalem riding upon the ass. You remember that they were putting palm leaves and old garments in the way, and they were chanting bits of the psalms. No doubt they were singing the Psalms of Ascent at that time, because they were going up towards the time of the Passover, you remember. And this was the practice. They went along singing these psalms, psalms of praise and psalms of gratitude. For example, in Psalm 120, there's a psalm of praise because God guards His people. And here again it's antiphonal, question and answer, or statement and response. I don't know what your version is like. I will lift up mine eyes unto the mountains. Then comes the question. We sometimes quote it like this: I will lift mine eyes to the hills, from whence doth come mine aid. Making a statement. That's not it. It's in the form of a question. I will lift mine eyes up unto the mountains. You think of the mountains, Mount Zion, as the people are going up to Jerusalem. From whence shall my help come? That's the question. And the answer comes, thy help cometh from the Lord, which made heavens and earth. There's a leader, perhaps the leader of the pilgrims. He sets the psalm in by saying, I will lift mine eyes to the hills, from whence cometh mine aid? And the people respond, the word is not my, it's thy. Thy help cometh from the Lord, which made heaven and earth. He will not suffer thy foot to be moved. He that keepeth thee will not slumber. Behold, he that keepeth Israel shall neither slumber nor sleep. The Lord is thy keeper. The Lord is thy shade upon thy right hand. The sun shall not smite thee by day, nor the moon by night. The Lord shall keep thee from all evil. He shall keep thy soul. The Lord shall keep thy going out and thy coming in from this time forth and forevermore. So this, as I say, is a wonderful psalm to response. Psalm 122 says that God is worthy of praise. And you can imagine the psalmist, the pilgrims singing, I was glad when they said unto me, let us go unto the house of the Lord. Our feet are standing It's the present perfect tense, which literally means our feet shall stand. Our feet are standing within thy gates, O Jerusalem. It is anticipation. And then the pride of these people in their city. Jerusalem, that art builded as a city that is compact together, whither the tribes go up, even the tribes of the Lord, for a testimony unto Israel, to give thanks unto the name of the Lord. This was particularly sung at the Feast of Tabernacles, which was a feast expressly for the purpose of giving thanks. So it's really a psalm of praise, because the people believe that God is worthy of praise. And then again, in Psalm 123, you have another lovely little psalm, a psalm of praise to God on behalf of God's people by the psalmist. Unto thee do I lift up mine eyes, O thou that sittest in the heavens. He's speaking, actually. I see that some don't ring the first bell. We really don't have enough time. He's speaking of God on behalf of his people. Psalm 124, God helps. If it had not been that the Lord was on our side, let Israel now say, if it had not been that the Lord was on our side, when men rose up against us, then he had swallowed us up alive. So that he speaks of the help that God gives to his people. 125, God is worthy of trust. They that trust in the Lord are as Mount Zion, which cannot be moved. And it's interesting to see how Mount Zion constantly crops out in these Psalms of the Ascent. So people are going up to Mount Zion, and they're going to praise God. And then again, 126, when the Lord turned again the captivity, we were like them that dreamed. The relief they experienced at being able to go up to Jerusalem once again. I'm going to leave it there. Read the Psalms through for yourself, and I think you'll find them fascinating. Psalm 31. Lord, my heart is not haughty, nor my eyes lofty. Neither do I exercise myself in great matters, or in things too wonderful for me. Surely I have stilled and quieted my soul like a weaned child with his mother. My soul is with me like a weaned child. O Israel, hope in the Lord from this time forth and forevermore. And if you can read these 15 Psalms and think of the people going up to worship and the joy they experience, I think you'll find they're fascinating Psalms to study. Any comments or questions on this? I know it's been rather scrappy today, but I've tried to go through too much. I never have learned that lesson, not to tackle quite so many Psalms at one time. But later on, we'll go back over these things and we'll study them in more detail. But I do want to get this survey in.
Jesus is Lord, my Redeemer. How he loves me, how I love him. He is risen, he is coming. Lord, come quickly. Alleluia. the trumpet of the Lord shall sound, and time shall be no more, and the morning breaks eternal, bright and fair. When the saved of earth shall gather over on the other shore, and the roll is called up yonder, I'll be there. When the roll is called up yonder, I'll be there. When the roll is called up yonder, I'll be there. When the roll is called up yonder, when the roll is called up yonder, I'll be there. On that bright and cloudless morning, when the dead in Christ shall rise, and the glory of his resurrection share. When his chosen ones shall gather to their home beyond the skies, and the roll is called up yonder, I'll be there. When the roll is called up yonder, I'll be there. When the roll is called up yonder, I'll be there. When the roll is called up yonder, when the roll is called up yonder, I'll be there. Let us labor for the Master from the dawn till setting sun. Let us talk of all his wondrous love and care. Then when all of life is over and our work on earth is done, and the roll is called up yonder, I'll be there. When the roll is called up yonder, I'll be there. When the roll is called up yonder, I'll be there. When the roll is called up yonder, when the roll is called up yonder, I'll be there.